We've been talking about chords and triads that are in root position, first inversion, and second inversion. And we've been referring to them as simply C major, D minor, G diminished, etc., etc. We can also represent these chords using a numerical code that we call figured bass. Now, figured bass is a kind of complicated topic, and so throughout the next few lessons, I'm going to start off just by telling you what figured bass is, and then we're going to get into a little bit more details about what figured bass is used for and where it came from. But for now, let's just start off and talk about what figured bass actually is. If we look at a chord that is in root position, we'll start off with C major, because always good to start off with the easy ones. Okay. Now, starting from the bass note, we've got a C. If we look at the next note up, the interval is a third. So from C to E is a third. Okay. Then, if we look at the G, the interval from C to G is a fifth. Okay? Now, keep those intervals in mind, because when we write figured bass, this numerical code, what you're going to do is write 5-3 underneath that chord. And that tells you that you have a chord in root position. Okay? Now, if we rearrange this chord and change it to a first inversion chord, let's see what happens with these intervals. Now, the bass note, the lowest note, is E. Okay? So, let's look at the interval from E to G. Okay, the interval is a third, still a third. Okay? But, if we look at the interval from E up to C, the interval is now a sixth. So, the figured bass for a first inversion chord is 6-3. Okay? Likewise, if we look at a second inversion chord, let's rearrange the notes again. This time the lowest note is G. Okay? So, let's look at the interval from G to C. What is the interval? It's a fourth. Okay? And then we're looking at the interval from G up to E, and the interval is a sixth. Okay? So, you can probably guess the figured bass for a second inversion chord would be written 6-4. Okay? So, if you see 5-3, that means that you have a chord that's in root position. If you have 6-3, that means you have a chord in first inversion. And if you have 6-4, that means you have a chord that's in second inversion. So these chords, again, are represented by this numerical code that we call figured bass. Now, the thing is that this is the complete figured bass. But what you're actually going to use is an abbreviated form. So instead of just writing 5-3, if you don't see any numbers underneath, then that means you're in root position. The reason is that root position is the most common and the easiest form, so you don't really need an additional numerical value to help you out. It's just easy to find out. Now, first inversion chord, instead of writing 6-3, you will see just a 6. So if you see a 6 underneath a chord, that means that it's a chord in first inversion. Okay? Second inversion chord is 6-4, and there is no abbreviation for that. It's simply 6-4. So if you see 6-4 underneath a chord, that means it's a chord in second inversion. Okay? I know that this is a little bit of an abstract concept at this point, but again, throughout the next few lessons, we're going to figure out how this is used. Okay? So bear with me, get confident with this, and then when you're ready, take a look at the next lesson.